weekly look at all of the hot topics in HR.
Whether it's passive talent or it's active talent.
That's a soft skill that really gets undersold in the hiring process.
How to manage in the virtual environment.
You get a diverse cultured group of people, it's a win-win for everybody.
More conversion from candidate lead.
What does that look like in this new virtual world?
Welcome, everyone. It is Thursday, noon Eastern time, and you know what that means. It is time for Talent Experience Live, your weekly look at the hot topics in HRs, interviews with leaders in the industry, as well as hot new HR tech. That one's always my favorite, but I'm a little bit biased here. Covering everything that you need to know in recruitment, talent acquisition, and of course, talent management. So while you are here, definitely share this out to your network. Sharing is caring. We do this every single Thursday, noon Eastern time, typically. But today's one. I totally lost my mind. We did Experience Phenom this morning, which ran from 11 to about 12:30. So we had to push back Talent Experience Live. But don't worry, we saved the best for now. If you're not able to catch the full episode, remember, you can always watch it on YouTube or the Phenom blog. That's www.phenom.blog if you are interested. We do a full recap with clips of the show, so you can always send it out to your friends, family, loved ones, maybe for a pick-me-up before the weekend. I know everyone in my family always loves watching Talent Experience Live. Today's topic is all around job descriptions. Oftentimes, these are the first touch point for your candidates, and the issue is sometimes they're not always that good. When I was in talent acquisition, I was banned from writing job descriptions because spell check didn't seem to work for me. I needed Grammarly at the time. It was riddled with errors. So they just took that privilege away from me. But we still posted job descriptions and people still accessed information about our organization that way. So why is it that sometimes they stink? I'm not writing all of them. I can promise you that, but they need to take that next iteration that technology continues to do so. Before we jump into that, I always like to start things off with an icebreaker. So my question for you, the audience at home, is when you look at a job description, what are you looking for? Is it compensation potentially listed? Is it experience? Is it the benefits? Is it the company culture, job requirements? What are you looking at when it comes to job description? What is most important for you? And while you answer that, I would like to say that what I always look for is the bullet points. I don't have time to read the jargon about the company background, the info. I want to get my information as quickly as possible. So I jump to the bullet points. And if I don't line up with the requirements or I'm missing a skill or something like that, boom, I'm out the window. I don't even think that I should apply for that job. And I think that is a huge issue in the industry today. But I'm not the expert on this. Today, we have a very special guest in studio as well. We have Amit Parmar, CEO and co-founder of Clickify. And without any more further hesitation, let's throw it over to Amit. Amit, how are you?
Good, Devin. How are you? Excited to be here.
I'm doing well. This is awesome. I love having the in-person interaction. I think it's going to be a bit more engaging than typical. Absolutely. We don't have to worry about technical difficulties or anything like that. Amit, I know you have a very robust past in talent acquisition. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the space and what brought you to Clickify now?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks to the audience and thank you as well for hosting me. Been in the HR space for the last 16 years. You name it, been a generalist to talent acquisition, to talent management in multi-billion-dollar organizations, and finally took the leap of faith to start my own software company that's AI-based about a year ago now. And prior to that, I was the global vice president of talent.
Okay. All right. It sounds like you have quite a bit of experience in job descriptions. So I have to ask you, what do you think of the majority of job descriptions out there? We covered it earlier in Experience Phenom. There are thousands, if not millions of jobs open right now. Yeah. And it seems like people are struggling to get talent in the door. So are the majority of job descriptions doing due justice to them, or do they need some room for improvement?
Yeah, I'd say, Devin, look, the HR function continues to be inundated with so many requests, right? And you've got budget pressures everywhere. So what happens is often you'll get job descriptions that are stuck in a folder somewhere, maybe one that was written like 2 years ago for the same position. And it happens because you're so busy. All you want to do is get this rec posted ASAP, right? And that's what typically happens is you get something, you start off with something that was 5 years old, 2 years old, in some cases even 10 years old, right? And you maybe tweak it a little bit, given the time constraints that you have as a recruiter or a talent or an HR leader, or even a hiring manager for that matter. And that's what happens. It is, in my experience, I think the way jobs are posted and advertised is a very underestimated step in the process. And that's what we're here to talk about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's funny that you mentioned that they may have been created 2-3 years. I was a big proponent of copy paste. That got me in a lot of trouble because sometimes I would miss something up, or if I wanted to make a change, of course, there would be a spelling error. But when it comes to recruiters, obviously I know my experience and how when I posted out a job description with a spelling error, it made my life difficult. Most of that was because my boss was unhappy with me. But overall, if a job description is too long, if the requirements are too stringent, what effect does that have on recruiters at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, it's so recruiters, when the job description has too many requirements or requirements that are unclear, it is, even before it gets posted, my suggestion to my teams as well as myself was always to take a step back and say, hey, and typically you have an intake discussion with the hiring manager. During that discussion, you'll say, hey, what are like the top 2 to 3 non-negotiables? I've got 50 million things listed here. What can you not live without, right? And typically in the discussions at the end of that, you will start to kind of yield maybe 3 to 4 key things that really was maybe even never written in the job description to begin with, right? And that's really kind of the approach that I would suggest for recruiters. And it makes it, to your point, if you don't do that step, it's a critical step in the process. There are all kinds of downstream issues, misalignment from the get-go in terms of what you're looking for, a lack of clarity for the candidate, and what happens when the top of the recruitment funnel isn't as higher quality as you'd like.
Yeah, no, it affects the entire TA team as a whole, right? And I always loved that whenever I talked to a hiring manager or something like that, they would give me nice to haves or need to haves, right? And if you put all of them in there, it's tough to decipher for a recruiter. If you have a list of 10 requirements, you forget which ones are nice to have, which ones are need to haves. And also, whenever I had a discussion with a particular hiring manager, they would always say, I really want an A player for my team, a real go-getter, right? And that's not something that you can necessarily put into a job description or figure out what that means for specific teams. So when it comes to recruiters maybe having that challenge of a hiring manager saying, I'm looking for that A+ player, how can a recruiter get the real answer out of their hiring manager and say, what are the specific skills that I can search for?
Yeah, great question. And often you'll hear hiring managers say, I want high potentials, right? Very vague definition of what that means, right? And a couple of questions that have worked well for me and my teams over the years is, hey, do you have any A players today in your team who you're trying to perhaps replicate, or you want maybe somebody with totally different skills? That's also inputs that you take into consideration. But once you kind of get to the point where hiring manager says, my top A player on my team is just making this name up, Susan, right? So then the question is, hey, what does Susan have that you actually love? Right. And, instead of having this HR jargony, like, hey, what are the skills you need? right. You really want to kind of really tone it down in a language that, just people generally understand, which is, hey, what is it? What is it that excites you or really gets you gets you kind of excited about what you want or what you see in Susan, right? And what are those top 3 things? It could be, It could be the soft skills like you mentioned, or it could be technical, hard skills.
Yep.
And then you get into, all right, what's the proficiency level and all of those kinds of things.
First of all, my mom's name is Susan. She is going to be thrilled that you used her as
I did
an
not know
example.
that.
Yeah, no. Fun fact, but it's true. It's an important aspect, and I think when you're modeling your team and you look at your A players, you can even look at what they're great at and where maybe they're not great. I mentioned that I wasn't the best at spell check or something like that. Maybe we need somebody who is very particular like that on your team, and that can sort of open up some of those questions for you. I know that over the past year, DEI has been a huge focal point for a number of organizations, if not all of them. What role do job descriptions play in when it comes to DE&I? Because oftentimes that's the first touch point, as we said at the beginning. Is it something that needs to be addressed? And if so, how?
Oh, absolutely critical area. And, there's a study done by the Harvard Business Review around, women apply to jobs when they're 100% qualified, whereas men apply when they're 60% qualified. And that actually is directly correlated with what you put in the JD in terms of the requirements. And what ends up happening, if you have too many requirements that are nice to haves versus must haves, you are inadvertently potentially reducing your talent pool in a more negative way as it relates to diversity and inclusion.
That makes sense. And an example that was shared to me at one point was a member of Phenom. His name's Cliff, and he said, "I want you to imagine, a person who works in garbage disposal, right? Immediately, your inherent thought is going to be probably a male, middle-aged, can lift heavy things, right? And when I know this is a focal point of Clickify, showing some visuals that may take away that bias and say, hey, I can do this role as well. And the same thing with specific language, right? If you're looking for sales teams, how often do you see, I want an aggressive individual, right? A real somebody will attack the market. And that can have a negative connotation on some of your candidates in that market. So my next question is, when we're talking about maybe some of those bullet points like aggression and things like that, what should they highlight realistically? If I'm the target candidate, right, I immediately scroll to the bullet points. We talked about cars a little bit earlier, right? And when people are looking at the specs, they're probably not looking at if it's a 4.0 liter engine or a 6.0, right? Miles per gallon, as well as the cost. So what should be really highlighted within a bullet point to protect organizations from some of those DE&I pitfalls that happen, as well as attracting the most candidates?
Yeah, Devin, great point here. And what we often forget in the day-to-day things we do in HR and in recruiting is we are marketeers, right? And when you kind of take a look at the basics of marketing, you got to look at the audience that you're trying to attract, or even check you out, right? Right. And as you do that, you have to kind of take a step back, and I'll share a stat. In the next 3.5 years, 75% of the U.S. workforce is going to be millennials or younger, right? So the way millennials, actually general public these days, really looks at content is in bite-sized fashion, as you mentioned earlier, visual, right? There's 59 million jobs in the last 15 years. There's 59 million job postings that are posted in a text format, right? That's a lot of jobs that are posted in a very traditional way. So, how do you get to the top 2 to 3 skills? So there's a massive move around skill-based hiring, right? And moving away from pedigree or, what college you potentially went to and so on, right? So, to your point, it's how do you visualize something? So for example, if, the garbage disposal role that you mentioned earlier, right? Imagine there's data science behind, a certain percentage of the population that's either male dominated or dominated by a certain, racial class. And then having that data feed that back into your decision-making around what kind of imagery you're going to choose for that job description, right? And that's what technology does for you today. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And the one thing you mentioned, was it 75% of the workforce will be millennials or Gen Z? I think back to the evolution of was it 75%? Was there?
75.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, no, you got it. Yeah.
When you think of the evolution of applying to jobs, right? Initially, it may have been just walking into a store, right, and saying, "Hey, are you hiring?" Then the now hiring sign kind of popped up. Then it was filling out applications that were paper form. Then jobs were posted in newspapers, right? And as we look at this next phase, it's meeting candidates where they are. And I see on social media, not just LinkedIn, jobs that are posting, organizations that are now hiring, and they're trying to catch, I think, passive talent in that way where somebody may be scrolling through their Instagram feed looking at what LeBron James did last night, and then they're like, you know what, maybe I am looking for a new job. So when it comes to social media, how important is imagery in that sense, and sticking away from just posting a text-based format on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, whatever it may be, to attract candidates?
Yeah, and we actually have data on this. Imagery is 4x more engaging, and it stops the scroll compared to a typical way a job is posted today in a text fashion, right? And having said that, to your point, how do you stop the scroll? And really, the intent is to start the conversation, not necessarily an application, right? So you're moving from this transactional mindset of, hey, I need as many applicants as possible, versus really, you want as many quality applicants as possible. And how do you drive quality? It's how do you get the content that resonates with the type of talent that you want to attract? Skill set, diverse, inclusive, just ultimately engaging.
Yeah. No, I love that aspect. And I think it almost requires recruiters and talent acquisition folks to rewire their brain a little bit in that sense. You mentioned that marketing and talent acquisition is almost synonymous in some sense. But when we look at the metrics that are really gathered from recruiters, it's sales metrics. It's how many calls did you make? How many emails did you have? How many meetings did you conduct? And when we look at that kind of catch-all of let's get as many people in the door and not have as many meaningful conversations, I think that really hinders a lot of individuals, especially if you're just picking up the phone and calling, and you don't have that target audience of, hey, I put out this particular visual to attract this particular audience.
Yeah, spot on. So some of the, what do they say? You are what you measure, right? And yeah, the type of OKRs and metrics you choose usually important in terms of the type of skill sets and the mindset that you create, or you end up creating, right? So as you're architecting as a talent leader, when you're architecting, what is it that you are looking to achieve from your talent attraction function, right? You got to really take a look at the hard metrics around, less transactional and more qualitative type of metrics, which is, how many people are actually following this person for that particular domain that we're after. So I'm just going to take an example, cybersecurity engineers, right? A metric that I would be more interested in from my team, as well as for me as a recruiter, would be, hey, am I creating enough followership from the cybersecurity community? And how am I doing that? Right? Versus how many applications am I getting? Yeah. Right. Does that make sense?
No, it 100% makes sense. And I think back to the other metrics that we talk about of time to fill, cost per hire, right? Things like that. At the end of the day, it should be quality of hire and maintaining candidates for the long term and reaching some of those DE&I initiatives that you may have, upskilling your employees so that you don't just bring in thousands and then next year you have to bring in more thousands. It's growing people through in your organization.
Yeah, and if I may,
yeah,
right,
absolutely.
The metrics that are easiest to capture are the metrics that we end up capturing, which is cost per hire, and they tend to be more transactional.
Yep.
The harder metrics are quality of hire. So therefore, you see organizations. I know there are great intentions out there, but it's very nebulous.
Yeah.
Right. So you tend to have a lot of metrics that, frankly, are highly transactional that we end up measuring because they're just easier to obtain.
Yeah, it makes me think of Moneyball, right? With the A's in the early 2000s, where they were looking at batting average in the traditional baseball, and then they took a spin on it and they made it all the way to the championship game. So it's interesting to look at it from that perspective. Yesterday we had our interns on, and I asked them a question because we were talking about social media, specifically around TikTok. You can't log on to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even LinkedIn without running into a TikTok. So my question is, are organizations beginning to advertise their jobs on that platform? And is it effective?
Oh, great question. So I have a 10-year-old. His name is Rahel. Forever on TikTok. He wants me to buy a Logitech steering wheel that he saw on a TikTok somewhere that somebody was using, right, for his video game. So anyway, it's powerful.
Yes.
Right. It is the fastest growing social media channel right now, bar none. Right. And, you'd be remiss if you didn't really look at TikTok in a serious way now and into the future around how do you get your brand recognized, earlier in people's careers. Maybe they haven't even thought about a career yet. Right. So how do you really start to do that? And frankly, you've got companies like Google, Microsoft, they do this anyway. You've got free laptops in high schools, in middle schools, in elementary schools. So that's the way I view TikTok, and we view TikTok as Clickify, is how do you get ahead of the curve before your competitors do?
That makes sense. I'm going to bear with me. I'm going to use another sports analogy, but it's like LeBron James when he was in high school. Let's get him in as much Adidas as we possibly can, right? To help sweeten the deal when he does turn professional. Of course, now he's Nike, so it didn't turn out well for Adidas, but we'll save that for another time. So we're talking all about, getting in front of this next generation of talent early on. When it comes to recruiters looking for talent to hire now, how important is it for them to leverage their own personal accounts as opposed to just posting out from corporate phenom account or whatever it may be?
Great question. So there's another stat. Candidates, or just people in general, especially millennials, which is going to be the majority of the workforce in the near future, they trust content from your employees or from their network more than they do any sponsored ad out there. I could be spending $1 million on a sponsored ad versus an employee or a hiring manager talking about the job. 9 times out of 10, you're going to get more engagement with the latter.
Yeah, they're trusted, right? In that sense, I hate to say this, but it's almost like corporations are oftentimes painted as the big bad evil monster in the corner trying to sell you something, promoting this post. Whereas if you see someone who you relate to and see some of their personal posts as well and say, I could see myself at that company because I want to talk about the New York Jets and how awful they may be, right?
Yeah, and it's more human. It personalizes some things for the candidate and just us as buyers as well. So this goes beyond just recruiting. It's how we as millennials, I actually just barely made the cut somehow, but I'm close to it. So, how we think about buying products. Similarly, we think about, engaging with a brand or a company in the same fashion. Is how trustworthy is the content that's being put out there. And the moment you put a sponsored ad out there, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It's just the way people are interacting with it. You're dropping the trustworthy factor.
Yeah. And I think with so many privacy concerns that are coming up, right? And we see this happening all across Europe as well as in certain states where they're beginning to block things. Apple released the new kind of ad blocker thing where you can't track as much data and information. So if you're unable to get that info from a grandiose perspective, right? A very broad perspective, building that personal network. We talk about referrals all the time on the program, and a friend of a friend. That's how I got this job at Phenom, and now I'm hosting TXL. So you never know who knows somebody when they're posting for a job.
And referrals are the number one way to get hired: faster, better, cheaper. It is the number one way.
And
to hire as well.
And they stay around for a long period of time as well. I don't know the exact stat off my head. I promise I'll go back and put it in the show notes.
I wish I knew as well. But it is referrals are the highest quality talent pools you can attract.
Now you talked a little bit about taking that leap of faith when it comes to creating Clickify. So what really prompted that to happen where you said, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to try and help recruiters on the front lines?
A couple things. I'd always wanted to kind of, build something from scratch. And this was a need I saw a gap in the market with. And we ended up testing it out before I took the leap. And, here I am. There's really, it's really about how do you make our jobs as talent professionals easier, supported by technology.
Yeah. That makes sense. And what exactly are you doing to assist with this job description nightmare that has happened with people like me creating typos and long lists of job description?
Yeah. So for one, we're actually moving away from text-heavy content, where we already have visuals, 2.7 million plus images that users on our platform can use. If it's if their marketing function is strapped for whatever reason, we have AI that actually will account for the diversity. So the example I shared earlier, we have data that actually pops up in the recruiter space that says this job title is 72% female dominated. Therefore, you may want to select more male oriented pictures or images, right? And skills. So we actually have we have top trending skills for each job title.
Okay.
So we just we're removing the guesswork out of the process.
Now I have to ask, when you're leveraging these sort of brief and very graphic heavy job descriptions, right, or images, how often does that spark a conversation right on the platform, as opposed to somebody logging onto a career site? We love Phenom's application process. I think it's fantastic. But when it comes to speed of hire, a lot of times the reason why referrals are so successful is because it doesn't start with that application process and jumping through that hoop. That comes at the latter half. So is that something that you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. It was actually part of our design thinking when we were building our product, was how do you keep the administrivia out of, as elongated as much as possible, right? To really start to engage the candidate up front in the process. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing a ton more referrals. We're seeing a lot more engagement with those cards on social, around how they're shared within the network. And that's where the referral factor comes in as well. And we're seeing about 4 to 6x more engagement compared to regular jobs that are published out there on social.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I think 4x return on anything that you get is fantastic. If somebody wants to find out more about Clickify, perhaps leverage it, where can they go? How can they access that information?
You can always look for me, Amit Parmar, on LinkedIn or Twitter, Facebook. I'm not yet on TikTok, but I will soon be. But certainly you can find me there, or just clickify.me as our website.
All right. I am anxious for your TikToks when they come out. So I can't wait for that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining today. Can't wait to have you on again as we talk about your TikToks and the evolution of Clickify as you grow this powerhouse and really revamp job descriptions as a whole for the better. Hopefully helping people find the right job right at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Awesome.
Take care.
Have a good one.
All right.
That was Amit Parmar, CEO and co-founder of Clickify. He's sitting right in the room with me right now, too. How bad is that? It was awesome talking to him all about job descriptions. If you missed any bit of the episode, you can always catch the replay on YouTube, on LinkedIn, or on the Phenom blog. I read out the URL again before. I won't do it again for you. Before we go, I do want to shout out to the Phenom interns who were on our episode yesterday. We talked about the truth about virtual internships. That was Denise Siebold, Riley Stack, and Gita Gunty. We have yet to come up with clips for it, so I apologize, but the full episode is on YouTube, so definitely check that out there. However, to go along with speedy job descriptions that attract people, one thing that we talked about last week was text to apply. And we were joined by Andrew O'Brien and Michelle Olivieri. I am struggling with words today. All about campaign tactics for text to apply and really to engage candidates where they are. We talked about a bit about that with Amit today, with regards to meeting Gen Z and millennials where they are. Text to apply is another way to do that. So with that, let's air the clip.
Text to apply is really built around the convenience that it offers, not just to candidates, but also to recruiters. And if you look at a lot of the use cases that we're going to dive into over the next 10 to 20 minutes here, it offers a lot of convenience for the companies that are trying to hire. It's about combining the convenience, again, of messaging, the convenience of SMS, and functionality of your career site. It's about easily reaching candidates wherever they are. If they're sitting in traffic on the highway, if they're walking through city, if they're at your place of business and you're trying to hire, where a lot of these companies, their customers are the same people that they're trying to hire as well. So again, it's all about helping them find the right jobs and then creating leads and applicants for your recruiting teams to follow up with as well. As I mentioned, it typically involves some type of physical advertising, whether that's as simple as a flyer in a store or it's a billboard above a highway, depending on what type of budget you have. But yeah, it's really about connecting a specific keyword, such as Phenom Jobs, to a phone number, giving candidates instructions to text the phone number or text the keyword to that phone number, and then initiating conversation from there.
Awesome. Well, that was Andrew O'Brien chatting a little bit about text to apply. I do want to give a shout out to everyone that chimed in the comment section. I saw Christina, Jonathan, Denise, as well as Vikas. Thank you so much for joining. Special thank you to Amit for coming into the office and doing this in person. I think it was a lot of fun. I can't wait to do it again. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Thursday and as well a fantastic weekend. I'll see you next week at noon Eastern time, I promise.